Science fiction has a representation problem. I watched over 30 hours of sci-fi movies and television in which Indigenous people are portrayed, and with surprisingly little variation, here is the arc in practically every movie and TV show.
I'm an Indian. Could be worse.
And that this is our land!
Although particularly prevalent, this storyline is by no means used only in sci-fi. Hollywood has recycled this narrative over and over and over. As a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta, and as a lover of sci-fi, I find this exhausting. So I traveled to Edmonton to speak to two women whose award-winning podcast, Métis in Space, deconstructs these played-out tropes using a framework called Indigenous Futurism. First up, Molly Swain, a PhD student who studies history through a radical feminist, Indigenous lens. Also, yeah, she's my sister.
So Indigenous Futurism is cultural production, so whether that be fashion, music, TV, writing, graphic novels, whatever it may be, that basically deal with Indigenous people existing. It's also us, Indigenous people, producing our own speculative fiction through our own cultural paradigms, through our own traditions, our own stories that allow us to exist now as fulsome people. Right? Not myths, not stereotypes, not tropes, allow us to exist now, in the past, and in the future, with our indigeneity intact and thriving.
Great work is being done by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis creators. Some even claim that we're entering a golden age of Indigenous cinema. So I asked Chelsea Vowell, author of the national bestseller Indigenous Rights, for her thoughts.
Because Indigenous Futurisms sort of encompasses a lot of different cultural production, there's a lot of amazing things happening, but it's not that it's being supported so much as it's just like people are just finding ways to do it. I don't know, golden age though makes it sound like things are great, and I really don't think things are great. I think that people are still very much struggling to get our stories out, and you're still running up against people who want those stories told in specific ways. We need funding, and we need committed funding across like the board for all of the types of cultural expressions that we have, and that is still not the case. So when that happens, I'll call it a golden age. Right now I'm calling it like it's the side hustle that everybody's doing, and what's coming out is fantastic and is very much more so about the stories that Indigenous people want to tell rather than what mainstream Canada wants to hear.
Okay, so the golden age may not yet be upon us, but women like Molly and Chelsea are certainly helping speed things along. In fact, it seems like a lot of the heavy lifting is being done by women and Two-Spirit people. To examine this, I spoke to Jillian Dolan, a local Métis artist and creator.
I think you're right. I think you also can't talk about Indigenous futurism without talking about Afrofuturism, and I think that was also true there. It was very much pushed by women, and you see Indigenous feminists walking in their steps, and we have to acknowledge that. I think women and Two-Spirit people have been some of the people who have been most silenced and most harmed. Indigenous men have been given more voices through more official channels. And I'm not saying that's a lot, but it was more. The spaces where they're coming up now are spaces that have traditionally been left alone by Indigenous men. And so you see a gap, like a plant sees a hole in the concrete and comes up through it. And I think that's coming up like weeds. It's a good thing, like dandelions, right?
Without real Indigenous perspectives in media, we get this.
The capitalist machine is self-perpetuating, and so it keeps us kind of caught in this washer cycle. And we just keep remediating the same stuff over and over again. There's never anything that's truly new or even truly historically accurate. And futurism is what allows us to escape from that washer cycle.
We might be writing fiction, and we might be making shows and stuff like that, and it's entertainment. But it's deeper than that, because it's really about us reimagining ourselves and reimagining the world we live in.
In its broadest sense, anytime Indigenous people go out and create lives and realities and futures for ourselves as Indigenous people, to me that is Indigenous futurisms in action. The land back movement is absolutely Indigenous futurisms. It is the struggle to reassert Indigenous understandings of relationality, Indigenous ontologies, Indigenous epistemologies, how we live with one another.
Science fiction gives us the gift of imagining new realities. Combined with Indigenous futurism, we can assert that we exist. We will continue to exist and boldly go where no one has gone before.
So Star Trek is like notorious for like dealing very poorly with Indigenous topics. They've never actually really gotten it right or anywhere close to right. However, I really love the Star Trek episodes that really push the boundaries of what we consider to be alive.
I love Logan's Run. It's so cheesy. Omega Man, and I really like old Pulp Fiction.
It's definitely Jurassic Park. The idea of bringing something back to life, the de-extinction is really interesting to me, as well as like the ethical parameters of that, especially with the work that they're doing on like the mammoths in Siberia in order to like stabilize the tundra.